Picture this. You're standing in Constantinople, 1453. The greatest city in Christendom has just fallen. But while everyone celebrates the military victory, something far more sinister is unfolding in the shadows. Thousands of women and girls are being systematically rounded up, categorized like merchandise, and their fates are being sealed by a bureaucratic machine so efficient, so coldly calculated, it would make your blood run cold. What I'm about to reveal isn't just history. It's a nightmare that lasted for centuries, hidden behind the grandeur of silk curtains and golden palaces. If you're fascinated by the dark truths history tried to bury, hit that like button and stick around until the end, because what happened to these women will challenge everything you thought you knew about power and conquest. Drop a comment. Did you know about this before today? Let me take you back to the Ottoman Empire at its zenith. We're talking about one of history's most powerful civilizations, stretching from Vienna to the Persian Gulf, from North Africa to the Caucasus, an empire that ruled for over 600 years. But behind every conquest, behind every expansion of territory, there was a system so methodical, so institutionalized, that it turned human beings into property with the stroke of a pen. The Ottomans didn't just conquer land, they conquered people and women. They became the empire's most valuable commodity. Here's what they don't tell you in the history books. When Ottoman armies swept through a region, victory meant more than raising a flag. The moment a city fell, special units would fan out with one specific mission: identify, capture, and classify every woman and girl of value. This wasn't random pillaging. This was organized. This was systematic. This was policy. Young women were separated into categories. The most beautiful? Reserved for the sultan's harem or given as gifts to high-ranking officials. Those with specific skills, whether they could embroider, sing, or dance, they became specialized slaves in noble households. The rest? Sold in public markets like cattle. Can you imagine being evaluated like a piece of furniture? Your worth determined by your face, your age, your virginity. That was reality for hundreds of thousands of women. But here's where it gets truly horrifying. The Ottoman Empire didn't just practice slavery. They legalized it. They wrote it into their laws. The Sharia courts provided official documentation for every transaction. Think about that. There were judges, official stamps, legal records. When you bought a slave woman, you received papers proving your ownership. She became your property in the eyes of God and state. This wasn't some barbaric practice happening in the shadows. This was respectable. This was normal. This was Tuesday in the Ottoman Empire. The slave markets were everywhere. In Istanbul alone, there were multiple locations where flesh was traded daily. Women stood on platforms while buyers examined them, checked their teeth like horses, inspected their bodies publicly. Historical records describe how buyers would demand women strip to verify they had no deformities. The humiliation was part of the process. Breaking their spirit made them more compliant. Prices varied wildly. A young Circassian girl with fair skin and light eyes could sell for the equivalent of a small house. An older woman? Or one considered less attractive? Maybe the price of a decent horse. Your value as a human being reduced to a number in a ledger, and the market was always hungry, always demanding fresh inventory, which meant the conquests never stopped. Now let's talk about the imperial harem, because Hollywood got this completely wrong. This wasn't some pleasure palace where women lounged on cushions eating grapes. The imperial harem was a prison with gilded bars, a hierarchy of suffering where hundreds, sometimes thousands of women competed for the attention of one man, knowing their entire future depended on it. Here's the twisted genius of the system. The sultan could have up to 4 official wives, but unlimited concubines. Women captured in conquest would be trained, educated, converted to Islam, and then maybe if they were extraordinarily lucky, they might catch the sultan's eye for one night. One night that could determine whether they lived in luxury or died forgotten in some corner of the palace. The competition was vicious. Women poisoning each other, spreading rumors, forming alliances and betraying them, all for the slim chance of bearing the sultan's child, because only a mother of a prince had real power. The rest? They were just bodies kept for potential use. Imagine hundreds of women locked in this beautiful prison, their entire existence reduced to waiting, hoping, scheming for a moment of attention from a man who might not even remember their names. But there's another layer to this horror that's even more calculated. When the Ottomans conquered a territory and defeated its nobility, they had a special policy for the wives and daughters of enemy commanders and aristocrats. These weren't just enslaved. They were specifically targeted for maximum psychological impact. The wife of a defeated general? She might be given to an Ottoman officer as a trophy. The daughter of a Christian king? Perhaps she'd end up in the sultan's harem. This wasn't just about sex or power. This was about erasing your enemy's legacy, taking the most precious thing they valued and making it yours. Historical accounts describe how these high-born women were paraded through Constantinople in chains, their fine clothes torn, their jewelry stripped, as crowds watched the mighty fallen. The message was clear. Your noble blood means nothing now. You're ours. Your children will be ours. Your very identity will be erased. And here's the part that makes this even more insidious. Maternal exploitation. The Ottoman system realized something diabolical. If you capture a pregnant woman or a woman with young children, you don't just own her. You own her desperation. Her need to protect her offspring made her infinitely more controllable. Mothers were separated from children and told compliance was the only way to see them again. Pregnant women were forced to give birth in captivity, their newborns immediately becoming property of their owners. The maternal instinct, the most powerful human drive, was weaponized into a tool of control. Some women were told their children would be given better lives if they cooperated. Others watched their children taken into the Janissary system, where boys were converted and trained as elite soldiers who would one day conquer more Christian lands. Imagine that psychological torture, your son becoming the weapon used against your own people. But the physical captivity was only part of the nightmare. The spiritual and cultural destruction was equally systematic. Forced conversion to Islam wasn't just encouraged, it was often mandatory. Christian and Jewish women captured in Conquest faced a choice that wasn't really a choice. Convert or face perpetual suffering. The conversion ceremonies were designed to break whatever remained of their former identity. You would be given a new name, usually Turkish or Arabic, erasing your original identity. You were taught new prayers in a language you didn't understand. Your old religion? Forbidden. Your old customs? Punished. Even speaking your native language could result in beatings. Within a generation, daughters born into slavery had no memory of their mother's origins. The cultural genocide was complete. A Greek girl's granddaughter wouldn't know she had Greek ancestry. A Serbian woman's descendants would be purely Ottoman in identity. The old world simply erased. The efficiency of this identity destruction was staggering. Ottoman records show how they tracked lineage, but simultaneously erased heritage. They knew where you came from, but they made sure you forgot. And throughout all of this ran a current of psychological terror that was absolutely calculated. Public punishments of disobedient slave women served as warnings to all the others. You might be working in a household and suddenly hear screams from the street, a woman being whipped publicly for trying to escape, or worse, for trying to contact her family in her homeland. The terror wasn't always physical. Sometimes it was the uncertainty, not knowing if your child was alive, not knowing if you'd be sold again tomorrow, not knowing if the master's favor today meant safety, or if his mood would change and you'd find yourself cast out or killed. Ottoman law gave slave owners near absolute power over their human property. A master who killed his slave might face a fine, maybe, usually nothing at all. You could be raped, beaten, mutilated, and there was no legal recourse. You weren't a person, you were property. The law said so, the judges confirmed it, society accepted it. The psychological warfare extended beyond the individual. When a city was about to be conquered, rumors of what happened to women would spread ahead of the armies. The terror was part of the weapon. Cities would sometimes surrender without a fight because the alternative, what would happen to their wives and daughters, was too horrific to contemplate. Now here's what makes this entire system even more chilling: the documentation. The Ottomans kept meticulous records. Court documents, sale receipts, harem inventories, diplomatic correspondence. They wrote down everything, the legalization and documentation of cruelty with bureaucratic precision. In Ottoman archives today, you can find the actual sale documents, names, ages, physical descriptions, prices paid. You can trace the paper trail of a 14-year-old girl captured in Hungary, sold in Belgrade, resold in Istanbul, eventually ending up in a provincial governor's household in Damascus. Her entire life reduced to a series of transactions, each one properly stamped and filed. The system even had regulations about breeding. If a slave woman bore her master's child, her status changed. She couldn't be sold while he lived, and if she had a son, she might be freed upon his death. But this wasn't mercy. This was livestock management. The same principles applied to horses and cattle. Produce offspring, increase your value. Failed to conceive, remain disposable. Diplomatic letters between European powers and the Ottoman court sometimes mention specific women by name. A captured noblewoman might be ransomed if her family could pay enough. But the negotiations could take years, during which she remained in captivity, and the ransom prices were deliberately set high, bankrupting families, ensuring most women were never ransomed at all. The documentation also reveals something historians often overlook: the economic scale. The slave trade, particularly in women, was one of the Ottoman Empire's significant revenue sources. Taxes on slave sales filled treasury coffers. The industry employed thousands: slave raiders, merchants, trainers, guards, eunuchs, administrators. An entire economy built on human suffering, all of it carefully recorded in ledgers. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of this entire system is what happened to most of these women: the disappearance, the silence. For every woman whose story survived in some record, thousands vanished completely. No name, no trace, no memory. Think about it. A girl captured at 14, sold into a household, works there for 50 years, and dies. No one records her death. She's not buried with her family. Her relatives back home never knew what happened to her. She just disappeared from history. No grave marker, no memorial, nothing. The silence in historical records is deafening. We have detailed accounts of military campaigns, architectural projects, political intrigues, but the women, their background noise, mentioned in passing, statistics without names, the suffering of hundreds of thousands reduced to footnotes. Some women left traces accidentally. A note in a margin, a name carved into a wall, a single line in a diary written by someone else. These tiny fragments are all that remains of entire lifetimes of suffering. The vast majority left nothing at all, and here's what makes the silence even more disturbing. It was deliberate. The system was designed to erase these women twice, first from their original lives and families, then from history itself. Enslaved women were discouraged from literacy. Their testimonies weren't recorded. Their experiences weren't considered worthy of documentation. They existed to serve, and when they died, they were meant to be forgotten. The few escape stories that survived are remarkable precisely because they're so rare. We know of maybe a handful of women who escaped and made it back to Europe, who told their stories to chroniclers. But for each one who escaped, how many thousands never did? How many tried and were caught and punished so brutally that no one else dared try? The disappearance wasn't just physical. It was cultural, familial, spiritual. A daughter taken from a village in the Balkans simply ceased to exist to her family. After a few years, they'd hold a funeral without a body. They'd mourn, and then they'd try to forget because the alternative, imagining her fate, was too painful. She became a ghost, present in their thoughts but absent from reality. The Ottoman system perfected the art of making people disappear while keeping them alive. You could be living in Istanbul, walking past your birth family if they came to trade, and you wouldn't recognize them. Your language gone, your name changed, your memory deliberately erased. You were disappeared from yourself. So what's the legacy of all this? What do we do with this knowledge? The Ottoman Empire fell a century ago. The slave markets are gone. The harems are museums now filled with tourists taking selfies where women once wept. But the silence remains. The erasure continues. Most people have never heard these stories. History classes focus on sultans and battles, on architecture and art. The women? Still invisible, still disappeared, still silent. But here's the thing about silence. It's a choice. Someone decides what history remembers and what it forgets. For centuries, the choice was made to forget these women, to let their suffering disappear into comfortable historical amnesia, to focus on the glory of empires and ignore the oceans of tears that built them. We can make a different choice. We can remember. We can say their names when we find them. We can acknowledge that behind every historical empire was a machine of suffering that ground up countless lives, particularly women's lives, and that the absence of their voices in the historical record is itself a form of violence we continue today when we don't speak about it. The Ottoman Empire's treatment of conquered women wasn't unique in history, but it was uniquely systematic, uniquely documented, and uniquely erased from popular historical memory. Every empire has blood on its hands, but we only see that blood when we choose to look. So here's my question for you. Now that you know, what do you do with this knowledge? Do you let it fade back into comfortable obscurity? Or do you make sure these voices, silent for so long, finally get heard? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more uncomfortable truths about history, subscribe because there's so much more they never told you. Remember, history isn't just about what happened. It's about what we choose to remember. And forgetting these women one more time would make us complicit in their erasure.